Hello, and welcome to Standing Strong for Marriages. Thanks for stopping by.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Standing Strong for Marriages. Hope all is well. Right in the middle of the weekend, doing a little video before church. Things are good. We tell some stories, do a lot of theology, article reviews, things like that. I'll probably touch on something here from one of the books we've looked at before, but I just want to tell some stories, things that I'm learning, some foibles, some mistakes, some improvements, and some realizations that I've had as I've been talking to people about this whole thing related to marriage permanence, protecting families and kids, trying to follow the Lord, trying to understand what the Lord expects from us, and how to deal with this world that sometimes feels like a catastrophe. One thing I'd like to say is if you are a person who's just generally a Christian, I would really recommend, and if you're married, I would really recommend digging into this marriage permanent stuff and talking to your spouse and your kids about it. I mean, why not? It generally is going to be a safeguard and a protection, a theological framework to help ask some difficult questions. I'm not going to say they're not difficult, but to look at it and to, I mean, if I was with my wife, if I had to go back, and start out day one as a Christian husband, even if I was in the engagement process again, I would say, let's get a real firm understanding about what this thing is that we've either agreed to or we're planning to agree to. What is marriage? What are vows? Am I really going to be married to you until death does us part? No matter the good, the bad, the sickness, the health, the sins. And I think the beautiful thing is that if you are married, this theology will really, really help safeguard your family and help you to realize, well, hopefully help you to be a more forgiving, loving, patient person, knowing that if someone leaves or whatever, that your situation is the same. And I know a lot of people experience that via children, that as God says, the two become one flesh. Yeah, we literally, when we have children, the two DNAs are combined into this new person, and we are basically forever connected with this person through the children. Most people have that as a realization and reality, regardless of what the theology says. I don't know why that doesn't always click for people. I think a lot of times, guys especially, are in some sort of denial as far as, oh, my wife would never do that. But that's not what the statistics say. Statistics are not very rosy, as we know. And for some reason, I think mostly it's not a coincidence. I definitely want to say it's not like men are morally superior and women are morally deficient. I don't think that. I think it's a matter of incentives. I think basically, in America, at least anyway, in most Western countries, women are heavily, heavily, heavily incentivized financially to destroy their families. And there are also a lot of the feminism that is alive and well in the churches tell women that they can remarry and do better and improve their situation and be independent and all that stuff. I mean, there's a bajillion content creators and people that have already said all that, so I'm not going to say that. What I would like to do today is tell you some stories about how it's been going in my personal experience as I've been talking to others about why I wear this ring, why I'm actually like giving friends and pastors these, like biblical resources on marriage. Like this is one I'll look at here today. David Sproule II, what the Bible teaches about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Great book. I met the man. What is it? West Palm, Florida. It's a coastal city in Florida, the United States. Good guy. It's been pastoring at the same church for like 50 years. Yeah, so I better. Well, it's good that I got to meet him. Yeah. Never know what tomorrow's never promised, right? 50 years is a good run for that guy. So hopefully, I'm glad I got to meet him while he's still alive, still working. Okay, so story number one was going to the Orthodox church. I go to a Protestant church right now, and I found that the guys, really the lay people, even the elders, are quite open and quite honestly willing to grab coffee, willing to ask genuine questions about marriage permanence, willing to look at 1 Corinthians 7:15, willing to look at a lot of these things. What seems to be the problem is really once you get into the leadership or the pastor roles. I send these pastors things, and generally they pretty much blow me off. Yeah, oh, thanks for the book. Set over here. Never hear from them again. Or, hey, here's this book. Here's this verse rain website. from our friend, bro. I'm gonna blank on your name right now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I've never spoken with you in person, but anyways, I appreciate your emails. Yeah. So, I'm sending these people these things, and they're really just coming back with these blanket statements like God allows divorce, or they're just really trying to sidestep the issue from a leadership perspective. So that's one thing I've been seeing. Leaders very, very, it's worse than hesitant. It's refusing to engage on this topic. Okay, that's just what's one takeaway from sort of the experiences that I've been having, and I'm assuming, if you go down this road, you'll run into a lot of the same. We can kind of talk about why that is or isn't, or whatever. But I think generally that's what, if you start to become a little bit outreach oriented and evangelistic in some senses about, hey, we really think this is an important issue. I want, if you were to say, I want to protect my family, I want to know the type of place I'm, bringing my tithe and my time and my children and my spouse to. I'd like to know what we actually believe around here. Unless you're a donor, a significant donor, or bringing a lot to the table, they're probably not going to want to engage with you. It's really going to be a cost-benefit analysis on their end, I think. And generally they're going to give you some, I don't know, not much. Let me know if your experience is different. That's been my experience. So I'm talking to this group of guys, Bible study at this Protestant church I go to. And one of the guys comes back to me and says, you know what? He said, man, he was just getting ready to get married. He was like, you should go check out the Orthodox church in town. He's like, I've been going there with my fiance. And he said, these guys, they line up exactly with what you think, as far as that there are no biblical reasons you can find for Christians enacting divorce. Not abandonment, not divorce, abuse. Same thing, right? I mean, kind of feels like the same thing. Or adultery. I said, really? Is that really true? He said, go talk to him. I said, all right. So I actually went a couple Sundays, and I was sitting there, and it was a fairly different experience. I visited a bunch of Orthodox churches when I did this study abroad thing in India, and we were just doing a big survey of like what's happening with the church in India. There was obviously like Syrian Orthodox and a bunch of other different non-denominational churches, Baptist churches, all kinds of stuff. If you've never been to an Orthodox service, it's very interesting, the decorations. If you go to a Greek Orthodox church, you'll get a mix of like Greek and English, because it's an English-speaking country where I live. But you can go to other ones that are just all in English, and I did that as well. And there was some weird stuff. Hey, brother, would you like to take some of the holy bread, blessed bread? No, I don't think so. So some things just made me uncomfortable. They were not necessarily wrong, but they were outside of my understanding for why we were doing them. And so for that reason, made me a bit uncomfortable, like kissing crosses, calling people father. I was like, don't we already know about calling people father? Just these things I didn't, feel comfortable. But I was sitting there sort of like internally being like, I like these things. I like some of the singing. I prefer this, but I can live with this other thing. It's okay. If push came to shove, I would rather be in an environment where my wife would be protected. I believe she's gonna come home, and I'd like to be in a situation where, we can go to a community that protects her and protects me, and, would protect any kids that we would have in the future. And that, I kind of liken it to, I don't know, I've never been like a prodigal spouse, but in my mind, I kind of liken it to, what if I had a spouse who struggled with, let's say, like alcoholism? Knowing that, even if they had been sober and, for 4 or 5 years, would I want to have a friend group? Would I want our friend group to be people that like to crack open a few beers at the lake, or, during the football game, or go out and have some burritos and margaritas? Would that be like really a loving, good setup for my spouse if she was a recovering alcoholic? No, I don't think that would be a great fit, And in the same way, I don't know that like prodigals, I don't know, I've never actually heard anyone talk about this, who is like a returned prodigal, restored marriage, whether they can go back into these churches that are tons of divorced and remarriage people and hear a lot of rhetoric and teaching that says that's fine. So I was thinking, I don't think that's good. I don't want to give money to that. I don't understand why guys would take their families into a religious organization that is obviously counter to everything that they're trying to build. I mean, that's how I see it. I think that may sound like a ridiculous or outlandish statement, but I think once you understand the breadth of what people have tried to do in order to justify socially all these divorces, whatever else happens, essentially the group of people that had done all their work at Duluth, or this like umbrella that they've kind of built that we were usually refer to as abuse, pretty much they're going to make that as absolutely wide as possible so that every woman is guilty of that and every man is guilty of that. And so what it means is there is no legitimate marriage out there anywhere. That's the definitions, and that's the thinking and the framework that they are pushing forward. And it's gotten very, very deep into the church, right? And so if you meet with a church marriage counselor or a secular marriage counselor, those ideas are actually taken as being superior to the morality of Christianity. And so it's very interesting to see, do we really have Christianity here operating like, I'm not sure if prima facie is the right phrase to use here, but it's for some reason comes to mind, as the primary operating thing? Or do we have some kind of other odd thing, I don't even know what to call it, that is really, really running the show, and the veneer of the thing is the Christianity, the Bible verses and all this stuff. But once it comes to what do we really allow, it is something like destroy any divorce, destroy any family, and go forward on some other thing. So how did I get off into that? Well, anyway, I guess what I was saying was that my friend was, that was my mindset going into this Orthodox church. And even I told the guy that I met with, the elder, I said, you know, why would any Christian man want to take his family to be involved in an organization that is obviously set up to destroy everything he's worked to build, and his wife and his children? Why would he go there? So that's why I'm interested. I told this guy, I said, that's why I'm interested in coming here, because I was told, and I didn't do a ton of research, honestly, but I was told that you guys are like the Catholics on that, and that you don't allow for such things, and you kind of draw a line in the sand. All right, so I went to a couple, like I said, Sundays, and it was weird. And then eventually it got to the point where I got in touch with the lead father, or the lead senior pastor, I'll call him. I said, look, I'm interested in converting or whatever, joining with you guys. You know, I'm a Protestant right now. I don't know all the ins and the outs, but my primary concern is, how are you guys protecting families and protecting marriages? And what do you guys think about this adultery stuff that we find in the New Testament about divorcees taking new spouses? So we scheduled a call, and I got on the call, and, you know, he'd been doing this job for 20 years. He told me that they spent 2 or 3 years, I think it was 3 years, in something I'll call like a seminary, getting his Christian education prior to starting this job. But that was like 20 years ago, right? That he went through all that. He's a nice guy. He's very, you know, he's kind of a nice guy. Yeah. But pleasant. And he was familiar enough with the verses, you know, the Matthew passages and some of the, just the general ideas. And he, for about 25 out of the 30 minutes, was pretty much saying, like, we believe in marriages. We don't believe in polygamy. We like to support, you know, people that are, we have a special tradition for people that are, you know, like, not married in the Orthodox Church. How do we, like, handle them? He said, we see their marriages as legitimate. We don't say that they need to get remarried or something, or they got some fake marriage over there in Protestant land, right? Or Catholic land. They don't see it like that, which I thought that was good. I actually have my notes here, so I'll just tell you some things. Any other big stuff here from that call? We talked about Matthew 19:9. He talked that it was like a case-by-case scenario. He did say that they make a decision, but sometimes victims are allowed to find a new and different spouse. I'm just writing that down. No polygamy. They don't do annulments. I said, okay, that's easy, like low-hanging yes or no answers. They do recognize marriages of unbelievers. Yeah, that's interesting, because I've come to realize that some people actually don't. I'm toying with the idea that Catholics do not think that secular people who marry each other are actually married. And the reason I think that is because I had a friend who had his first marriage annulled because he was Protestant and she was Catholic. And on that basis alone, they didn't recognize it as a true and valid marriage because they both need to be Catholic, is what he told me. And so because he was a Protestant, she was a Catholic, it wasn't a real marriage. And so they didn't annul it based on some like adultery that she had done to him. They annulled it based on not everybody was Catholic, which means obviously all the secular people out there must not be married, right? So a lot of interesting things I'm coming into here. But so I'm asking him about, this is why I'm asking him, like, do you guys recognize the marriages of unbelievers? They said yes. He said it's handled differently based on if it's like a Greek versus like Slavic congregation. He said they were Slavic. So, we didn't get into all that. I tried as best as I could to ask him, do you guys believe that people should divorce from sinful marriages? That didn't really hit home. Like, he wasn't using a lot of the same language that like we use here. And so for 25 minutes, it's like, I asked if a person who was divorced or remarried could be a member. He said yes, they could be a member. And if they could be a priest, he also said yes. So I said they do not require their priest to take a vow of celibacy and a vow of poverty. I said no, they can be married. They can even be remarried and become priests. And so it was all kind of like, I don't know why, trending in a certain direction, but the tone of the conversation really changed when I got to like my last question of the call, because I was really trying to figure out where this guy stood. And as I retold this story to a buddy of mine, he actually thought that this was a very, very useful question that we could use to kind of like get to the heart of things and put the burden on other people, which is, I took him to Matthew 19:9 and we read it together. I said, flip over to Matthew 19:9 and I read it. Right, and I think 19 is I think that's the one where you're dealing with a person who enacts a divorce, right? And then if they remarry, it would be adultery with that exception clause in the middle, right? So, but chapter 19 is more talking about the person who enacts the divorce, right? What are they allowed to do and what are the implications for them? And so I just asked him, I said, can you describe for me a situation based on this verse when a person would enter into an adulterous second marriage? And this is when he started backtracking really hard. Like and he didn't become angry, but he just became very like almost aghast. He was like, oh no, like we would never talk like that here. Like we would never even suggest that such a thing could be possible. And he basically gave me a 3-point answer. Point number 1 was he went back to, and I think he was kind of, you can tell when people, they don't know really what to say. And so they're kind of like scrambling and just like trying to come up with something in a moment when they're supposed to be the expert. They're supposed to know the answers and they haven't maybe come across this question before, and so they're kind of like dancing and they're like, oh, I mean, well, like, let's just start saying some things that we know to be true and maybe like we'll work our way to the right answer, which we all do. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but he basically started with the analogy, the picture you can have from archery of sin being anything less than a bullseye. So a deviation from perfection, whatever that margin is, a small margin, a great margin, whatever it is, that people are sinners, that this is what it is to be human in this life. And that happens all the time in the context of marriage as well as outside the context of marriage. That it happens. I said, yeah, of course. I'm with you on that. I understand the analogy. I heard this a long time ago, of course, I'm with you. Point number 2, God is gracious and merciful. Once he started down that road, for those of you who have been doing this work for a while, we watch people go in this direction. It's very common. You could either call it like reform thinking or Calvinistic thinking or whatever you want to call it, but it's basically a jumping into God is gracious and God is merciful, and that's the key thing to think. And then he referred again to missing the mark, and he really said he couldn't come up with any situation where a marriage could be adulterous. And I said, well, okay. I said, so that's really interesting. I mean, I don't want to even really analyze it. That's just a story. And maybe it's not an experience that you've had. Certainly not an experience that I was expecting to have. And I guess we could talk about what it all means. And, was this guy like a one-off? We certainly know he wasn't a new person, right? He'd been at it for a long time. And And so I think what was interesting about that question is it does really put the scriptures in their court for them to describe situations in which marriage could be sinful, or to make some even fictitious, situation, and just to find that the guy would not even go there at all, and even his demeanor, like I said, oh, we would never ever talk like that. Like this is we don't think or talk like that. We would not do that. Really? I mean, nice guy, but it's like surprising. That's not what I was expecting. All right, so there's my one story, and I think I really decided, well, this is very different. This would take like a huge amount of work. I think multiple years to kind of like transition fully. And I just thought, I'm not really gaining anything. I mean, I might as well just stay put where I am in the discomfort and discontent that I have at my current Protestant church, because I'm going to basically get the same thing with these guys. Now, I should do some more research. There's only there's a difference between like doing research and finding what does the Orthodox position really say? Yeah, which is great. Maybe it could be great. But if you can't find one of those churches in your city, then where does that leave you? And I think this is a big issue to realize the practicality of the implications of marriage permanence. Is like reading these authors, these people who passed away. Almost all the people that I've covered, except for Stephen Wilcox, is still alive. But like David Sproule, Leslie McFall, Joseph Webb, they've all passed away. And I mentioned this before. I mean, I think of Followers of the Way in Boston as a place I would love to be part of. I was even thinking recently, maybe I could help them do a church plant in my city, because I can't find anywhere. The point is coming to certain like theological and practical conclusions about where you stand on things. If that means that you are basically like on an island and there are no churches that you know of in your area where you can go and attend and be supported and not have to fight everybody on these issues, that doesn't do you a lot of good, right? If your solution is basically like, all I need to do now is just pack up my entire life and move to Boston, right? I mean, that's not really a solution. And I highlight that because it's going to take me into my next story, which I think was very much one of the thoughts that one of my friends had as I was talking to him about these issues. I sort of laid out some of these things, and I really realized that there was a number of problems that I was creating for him, practical problems that it was just going to be a lot for him to deal with. All right, so let me tell you about my friend. I won't share his name. I always try to protect people and talk in anonymous ways, which I think we should do, especially with our spouses. I read that 1 Corinthians, 12 or 14, or 13, I can't even remember, the passage on love, and that one of the things that love does is it always protects and it honors. So it doesn't shame. So that's been very helpful for me too. And there's nothing that my friend did that was shameful, but I just think it's important to always like protect people, especially when we speak publicly. And right now I'm erring, if I'm going to err on one side, I'm erring more towards that side rather than going like the John the Baptist route and calling out people publicly and all this stuff. Sort of using these, I don't know, shame tactics, I guess, public shame tactics. I mean, shame only works when it's public, right? When it's private, shame isn't really well, I don't know if that's true. Shame can also work in private, but it has an element of like public exposure of wrongdoing. Yeah. I'm just not comfortable with that as a primary strategy. So I'm just be very careful not to say anything bad about my wife or anyone. That's my plan for this moment. But we can't speak in generalities, and I will tell you right off that I have this long-term friend that I like very, very much, and he's a smart guy, and he's definitely a Christian guy, and he's not kind of just a little bit interested in Christianity. He loves the Lord, okay, and he's trying to raise his kids in that way, and he's making sacrifices to do so, and so is his wife, and they know the scriptures, and they memorize the scriptures, and they read the Bible together, and they pray as a family, and they're real good. So he comes in and he asks me, okay, what are some of your like thoughts for the future? I tell him, well, I don't know. I've been going to this Orthodox church a little bit, and maybe I'll go there. I'll just tell you right off, I made some mistakes. And this is the thing that I'm allowed to talk about my own mistakes with you so that you could hopefully learn from them. One of the things that was not helpful that I did in this conversation was said, well, I really feel like that the Protestant churches that I've attended have misled us and not been straightforward with us about some of the things that I've found related to marriage, divorce, remarriage. And I think that I really wish that these people would, talk to us in the Greek about some of these passages and help us to understand, at least as like a survey or an overview, that there is reason to think that marriage being for life and remarriage being adultery is a reasonable position to hold. That some Christians, many Christians perhaps, have held it over the years, and that it should be at least explored or talked about. And if it's false, then properly debunk it. Or if it's true, at least, or possibly true, at least lay out the arguments for why that's reasonable. So that people aren't just left in this like weird confusion of some vagueness of like God is love and Jesus died on the cross, but we don't really know how we should live, I kind of opened it up like that, but I opened it up worse than that because I kind of sort of aired some frustrations, I think, in some senses, and really said something more like people have either like willfully misled us or at least kept the truth from us, in my experience. And he said, well, I haven't had that experience. He said, people, they talk in Greek words and they break it down. For whatever reason, we got into this thing about 1 Corinthians 7 and abandonment. So he basically opened up and he said, well, I think there's reasons that people can get divorced, and the divorce ends marriages and people can get remarried. It's like there's, God is, has like, there's certain things, certain lines, and if they're crossed, then that's it for the marriage, and people are justified in leaving and going and finding someone new. Obviously, that's not my position. And somehow, like I said, we got into the abandonment issue. Now, this is where I really made some mistakes. Now, I'd warn you guys, like, it's a lot different listening to YouTube videos passively about this stuff, or having read maybe a David Pawson book or some other marriage permanence book, right? And said, okay, that's what I think, versus going and talking to people and being able to actively answer questions. Yeah. So I will tell you, I was not very well prepared on some of the, say, arguments he was making about why 1 Corinthians 7:15 primarily allows abandoned people to take new spouses. Now, here's what I got right, and then I'll tell you what I got wrong. What I got right is that I remembered there was two different words used in New Testament Greek, right, for marriage and slavery. I knew that in 1 Corinthians 7:15, I'll read it just so we all know what we're talking about. I'll read it in the NIV, which is a bit vague, but I think he was reading it to the NIV. And it reads, but if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or sister, obviously talking about Christian there, is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to peace. You read that in English, I read that in English. That sounds like they're not required to stay married to this person who left. Like they're not bound. Now, I knew that from this book, and part of my frustration is I didn't come across this book until like year 7. Yeah, like year 7. And then, so David Sproule, you can find this on Amazon. I met the guy, coastal, he's in like West Palm, or Palm Beach, I think it's Palm Beach, Lakes, Church of Christ, I can't remember, but he's a nice guy. But I told my friend, man, and I guess I just said, there's 7 years that I went through like confusion and lacking clarity on what did this mean. Really. I mean, this guy's book really sealed it for me. So what I knew was that there was two words, a word for slavery and a word for marriage. I knew that in 1 Corinthians 7:15, when it says the brother or sister is not bound, I knew in this conversation after reading this book that it said the brother or sister is not a slave to their unbelieving spouse, which means it says nothing about the situation of the marriage between the two people. It's talking about, should you follow them in their lifestyle, sinful lifestyles, because they are living as an unbeliever. Maybe they were previous a believer and they fell away, or maybe they'd never been a believer and had always just had sinful activities that they're involved with. And now it had come to a breaking point for the relationship, a in or out, do or don'ts. Come with me or don't come with me. Your spouse is going in this ungodly direction. What should you do? Should you follow them or not? Now, I got it right in where I said the point of the passage is to give instruction to Christians who are stuck in these moral and emotional conundrums, to say, in that situation, do not sacrifice everything to keep the marriage alive. Don't do that. Instead, follow the Lord. Follow the Lord, and if your spouse leaves you, your spouse leaves you. And that can be very tough to say, but you don't catch very much of that in English, right? We would need a Greek-speaking pastor like this gentleman to help us understand the verbs. I said, that's frustrating. My friend said, no, the churches I go to, I don't know where you've been going, but he's like, our churches, they talk about the Greek. And I said, well, apparently not on this passage, because what you're telling me does not line up with what the Greek teaches. Now, I got the conclusion right, that the marriage is for life, like he says at the end, 1 Corinthians 7:39, marriage is for life. We can read that here. It's very clear. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes. But this new person, he must belong to the Lord. Okay, he must be a Christian. I said 1 Corinthians 7:15, this passage, no longer bound, does not contradict the section that I just read, that marriage is for life, essentially. I got that part right. But there's parts I missed. I was trying to force both dio and doulou is the word for slavery, dio is the word for marriage, into this one passage. I just didn't have it memorized, and it was late at night. There's other factors, I'll get to that in a second, which I think is helpful for us if we're going to try to do this work to help our friends protect their own families, right? That's what we're basically trying to do, is help them protect their own families, even though they're not going to feel like that's what we're doing, but that's what we're doing, right? I said there's this word for slavery, there's this other word for marriage. 1 Corinthians 7:15, where it says is not bound, is not talking about marriage. They are still bound maritally. They're not bound in the sense that the Christian has to go off into all these carnal, ungodly, sinful lifestyle paths. They don't have to do that. My friend says, no, it can't mean that. That doesn't make any sense. I wasn't very helpful because I'm like trying to say, I was just messing it up, I was just messing it up. Like, essentially what you should know in your mind is that 7:15 uses the word for slavery, and that there's no other, dio is used in other places. Okay. So basically what I'm saying is that I wasn't very good at just like breaking it down in the Greek, because I'm not a Greek student, I'm trying to bring this together. Where's the other part? All right. So this book, we've covered it before, but I'll just read it because it is important. Because the other part I missed was the present tense, which is not hard to remember, but you should remember that if you're going to engage with people and try to teach them, you have to be skilled enough to get it right? Otherwise, I would just tell you from experience, it's going to be a bit of a disaster, and you're not going to help your friends very much. After this, I'll talk a little bit about how much we should expect from these initial conversations, and I would say not very much. But look, I didn't get it. On our part, we have to get it right. We have to get it right. Otherwise, people are really not going to be very convinced that we've actually done the work, that we've done it, but we need for me anyways, I need to bring it to a higher level. All right, so this writer, it's on page, 41. The word bondage in 1 Corinthians 7:15 must be understood biblically, is what he says. He says bondage is from the Greek verb doulou, and it's akin to the noun forms doulos. I think Catholics have some kind of thing for men where they go to a doulos retreat. You'll hear this word a lot: slavery to God, servant of God, whatever, however they market it, but it's something in those terms. So you've probably come across this term before: doulos or doulou, slavery. So combined, the verb and the noun forms appear 135 times in the Greek New Testament. So it comes up a lot: slavery to God, bondservant, and stuff like that. So here the verb bondage, doulou, is never used in the New Testament, referred to the marital bond. That's really important. Never. It's never used. This term appears 135 times, and never once is it used to refer to a marriage, meaning marriage is not slavery. That's really important. The more of this that you could say, this occurs 135 times in the New Testament, and never once is it used to refer to marriage is an important point. They probably don't know that. It's an important detail, right? It gives a lot more like strength and help. 0 out of 135 is a lot. 0 out of twice, not that convincing. But if you have 135 occurrences, it means that it shows up a lot. And you can say that it because it never comes up in terms of marriage, must mean it doesn't refer to marriage. Okay, the verb bondage, doulo, is never used. Okay. The NASB translates the verb enslaved frequently. So you can find it in Acts, Titus, 2 Peter. It's used of the Christian being enslaved to God and to God's righteousness. We see that in Romans 6 in 2 different places, verses 18 and 22 of Romans 6. He says, but marriage is never viewed in the Bible as slavery. In passages where Paul was writing of the marriage bond, and even here in 1 Corinthians 7, he uses a different word. Okay, so this is important. We're not Greek speakers, but we have to know this if we're going to tell people this is really important and you should consider changing your entire life or the trajectory of your family or how you think about your spouse or the degree that you're willing to forgive them. Usually this will come up when people are very distressed and hurt and they've been victims of different sins and they're saying, I just want to throw in the towel and I have a hard heart. And I'm bitter towards this person. I don't love them. I don't want to be married to them anymore and I can never forgive them. And you got to come in skillfully and say, well, this is how it works. And you can't be all like wishy-washy and like, you need to be pretty good at it. That's what I would say to myself based on my foibles and floundering around with my friend. So when these writers talk about marriage in Greek, they use a different word. It's D-E-O. I call it D-O, okay? By using a different word, readers would know that this was not about the marriage bond. Great point, except that would have been true for original readers of Greek. For us, dude, we need someone to help us. It is not clear what is being talked about. And I can understand why I was confused for 7 years and why my friend, I would say, is confused now. Because if you read it in English, the way that they wrote it and that they didn't give us any like extra information to kind of get us to the right part, when they say like the brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances after their unbelieving spouse abandons them, I mean, everybody in their mother, normal person, English speaker would say, that means that they're not married anymore. That's reasonable. I mean, that it doesn't mean that any of us are unintelligent or wicked of heart or looking for some sort of loopholes in order to be able to live in some sinful ungodliness. It means that in the English it's presented to us by the New International Version and most pastors, we are never going to see it unless someone like this guy does the work for us and helps us understand Greek words. I mean, I know there's people out there, there's some of you out there that are like, you're big students, you like studying theology, you'll get Greek, concordances and all this stuff. There are some of you that are out there like that. I'm not really one of those people. I don't have a Greek anything. I don't do that type of study usually. I've also found that the concordances are also very not helpful. I have friends that rely very, very heavily on concordances. And it does them a disservice, basically. So that's a whole other ball of wax. But the point is, here in this passage, he is saying, brother and sister, you are not enslaved to their lifestyle. That's what I would say. It would be more helpful if the New Testament was written like that. Brother and sister, you are not a slave to their ungodly lifestyle. Rather than saying what it says, the way it's translated, no longer bound. Brother or sister, the brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances. It's just not helpful. And the pastors, what I was expressing to my friend, haven't done us any favors either. He did not like that. Why did he not like that? Well, let's think about what we're doing to people when we say that to them. We're essentially taking a huge hammer to like one of the pillars of what they've built their life on and saying, essentially what? The pastors and the churches are unreliable. At best, they're unreliable. At worst, they are something very bad. And you're taking a big hammer and you're like whacking away at something that is fundamental and critical and sacred. It is sacred in their life. How do you expect that they are going to, how should I have expected that my friend would have responded to that? The same way that I responded to it a long time ago. Disbelief, confusion. It was a very dark feeling to think that, is this on purpose? I'm a normal person. I don't do this professionally. I got the books, I found people. And what this guy is basically arguing is that there's an outrageous amount of fraud in the American churches related to divorce, what's being taught about God's will, God's ways, God's kingdom. It's horribly sinful, something like similar to like Balaam's deception, or just very, very wicked and evil. And it's still upsetting to me now. But at the first moment of beginning to think about those things, it was like almost too much to handle. I think one of my big points in telling this story is that those of us who have spent years wrestling and fighting and digging and searching and listening and thinking and praying have come to certain conclusions that have taken us years to get to. Therefore, if we enter into a conversation with somebody, let's try not to like unload the whole thing on them all at once, right? I would not have been able to accept all of this information in one sitting. Why would I expect anyone else would be able to do that? And if someone had unloaded it all in one sitting on me, I would have rejected it. I would have rejected it, and I would have rejected them. And it's not a reflection of their character or their presentation skills or their whether or not I like them or not. I just would not have been able to destroy these critical pillars of my own life, because then the whole house kind of falls. And where do I go next? If I can't go to my normal church, if I can't trust pastors, there's a long list of things that comes up, right? And I know you guys know this, but I'm saying in my mind, how do we talk to people about this? And I think in one sense, maybe it's almost better just to present things and not defend them. So this is what I think. This is what I learned from the scriptures. To be skillful at it, like I said, I'll point out some other important things to remember. But one is doulou, one is dio. 135 times doulou is used in the New Testament. Never is it used about marriage, and doulou is used in this passage. If you can at least say that, that's pretty good. There's another second part that would be even better, so let's jump into that. But I think there's a lot going on. You're trying to not get too upset about what was done to your spouse and done to you. You are trying to, from memory, do work in a foreign language that you do not know, Greek, and you have to answer like a lot of different other questions that they might bring up. Just saying, it's not easy. So you better be ready on an emotional level, on a forgiveness level, and then also like on a language skill level. So let me keep going, because I got that part half right, but I got it half wrong. Dio is used in this passage, but it's used later on in this passage. I was trying to slam everything all into this one 7:15 verse, that there's dio and there's doulou and there's one, and my friend was like, I don't see two different verbs, like where are you coming up with all of this? This doesn't sound right. He was saying to me, Brian, this doesn't really sound right. And I'm like, no, it's right. I'm telling you. But I made a bit of a mess of it, just honestly. Because of my lack of skill and preparation. I wasn't planning on having this conversation with him either. But anyways, you never know. You got to always be ready to give a answer for the hope that you have. Why are you hoping in God to rescue your wife or your husband, right? It can't just be, I don't know. You could say that. I just believe in God, but that's not going to do much help for them. Anyway, the very, very simple conclusion is that he's not talking about the marriage bond here. All right, let's keep going, because this is the other part that I totally missed and I think is very helpful. I'm going to skip some parts, and I want to get to the Greek present tense. So it's probably been a minute since you've been studying foreign languages, especially the way that they teach it in university, if you ever studied it at the university level at all, where you're talking about conjunctions and prepositions and prepositional phrases and direct objects and indirect objects and various different present progressive and past and preterite. Yes. And here they're going to talk about the perfect tense. You can remember that. I can remember that. This verse is written in the perfect tense. So when it says the brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances, this is written in the perfect tense. Perfect tense. Where is this written? Okay, here we go. I'm on page 42 if you have this book, section D. So he goes on, he says, like, look, 1 Corinthians 7:15, the word for bondage, doulou, which is the slavery one, is written in Greek perfect tense. You can remember that. I can remember that. We should memorize that if we're going to talk to people intelligently about this and in a way that's helpful to them. If it's a ministry, you want to help other people, right? If you're going to make this your ministry, we need to put in the work. So it's written in the Greek perfect tense, and the Greek perfect tense denotes a completed action in the past, but with a present result. It emphasizes something taking place in the past, but with a result that's still abiding. So here, the perfect tense bondage in 1 Corinthians 7:15 literally translates to the brother or sister. I'm going to kind of, the NIV says the brother or sister is not bound, right? So he's saying, if you want to translate that literally, or like an expanded way, using present tense, which is used here, it would say that the believer was not bound and is still not bound. Past, completed, but with a present result. The Christian was not bound and is still not bound. Was not bound, is still not bound. Could that be talking about marriage? You know, let's ask ourselves. If that's how they wrote it, could they even grammatically be talking about marriage? He spells it out a little bit more for us. It means that the Christian was not enslaved before his spouse departed and when they were still together, and is now not enslaved after the departures happened. Wasn't enslaved before, and now that the person is left, still not enslaved. Wasn't a slave to them before, they departed, still not a slave. Was never a slave. It's never a slave because we're 135 times, slavery is never used to talk about marriage. Here, though, he's using the slavery term. So if he's not talking about the marriage, then what the heck is he talking about? What is he talking about? Well, he says the Christian has never been in bondage that is under the consideration here. The word bondage in the perfect tense cannot at all refer to the marriage. The Christian was married to his spouse and still is married to his spouse, even though they left, even though they departed. So when it says, is not bound in such circumstances, God has called us to live in peace. He's not making any claims about whether or not the marriage still exists or it doesn't. To drive the point home even further, if you were to do a substitution for the word bondage and slide in marriage, then it would read, the believer was not married and is still not married. This is when it becomes really, really clear. That doesn't make any sense, right? Obviously, the couple was married, husband and wife. Someone left. But to say that they're not married now would also mean that they would have to say they were never married. And no one thinks that. I really don't think anyone thinks that. It's obvious that there was a marriage at some point. So he says substitution does not fit because it is not the marriage that they're talking about. So a Christian was not required to compromise his faith when his spouse was still with him, and he is not enslaved to compromise his faith for his spouse now. I skipped a section, but basically he goes on and say, what is this slavery language? And he says, slavery is always slavery to God, God's righteousness, God's kingdom, God's ways, first and foremost. Don't compromise on that. Even if your spouse says, forget this Christianity thing, I'm going over here and I'm doing this other thing, and they want to do who knows what ungodliness, don't follow them. To follow them would be like basically paramount to idolatry. Yes? You can see that? Yeah? So don't do that. Don't put them before your Lord, your King, your Father, your God, your Savior. Keep following him in his ways. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, right? These are the promises. You guys know them, but we go into these churches and I'm telling you, it's like they just confuse, and we're not allowed to ask questions and answers, typically, right? Otherwise we would, and then it might be exposed that like, well, hold on, this doesn't really make sense. Like, that was a great question from the back. Like, yeah, like you said what? But we don't do that. We're just told to sit there, passively listen, no questions, and go home, right? It's a weakness in the way that we do it. It should be more interactive, I think. Which is why I think that YouTube is like, and other social media platforms allow people to ask questions, give comments, and it's more like a group participation. And like reaching. It's just, I think it's good in that way. All in there, obviously, like he says more things, but that was one of my big takeaways, is that just me, myself, I really put a big stake in the ground on this issue. And, I read the books to the degree that I was convinced about the path that I should go, even if it's hard. But, people came to Jesus with questions. And he was prepared. And I'm telling you guys, I was not prepared. I wasn't expecting to have this conversation. I didn't do that well. So you can learn from my mistakes. There are 2 reasons why I think I didn't do well. Let's get a little warm here. And I think you should be aware of these, because I think they are going to be pretty common. I alluded to them before, but I think that's really worth saying clearly. One of the reasons I did not respond very well was for my own, emotional something. Essentially, I like my friend a lot. I typically feel very alone in this fight. I told my friend, except for a few people online, a few interviews for people that live in different states, I don't think I know anybody in real life that is doing what I'm doing here in my city. I have had other friends that have called me in the last 10 years and said my spouse left, and now they are praying for the restoration of their family. And they are my friends. I do know them, and I see what they're doing. But generally I feel very alone. I brought that into this conversation, right? And essentially, what if I was more just straightforward with my friend, I should have said to him, I really appreciate you. I love you as a brother. And there's a lot of things I like and respect about you. And I desire that you would stand with me and help me, carry this burden. I would like you to be a brother to me in that way. I should have said that. I didn't say that. But that would have been more vulnerable and a good thing to say. So I think that's what we're saying. And I should say that to him in the future. Yeah. Now, he was not going to be able to do that for me, which was obviously a disappointment. And there's a trap there where you and we could take that personally. Oh, my friend doesn't care about me. Oh, my friend is a threat to me. Oh, my friend is going to be like kind of that person who likes to drink margaritas at the game while my spouse is a recovering alcoholic example, right? I'm trying so hard to restore my family. I'm looking for revival. I'm praying that, people would come to help us and fight with us in the spiritual realm. And when people say, no, this is like a little ridiculous what you're doing, I don't necessarily agree with you. I definitely don't think you're right. And while you can do whatever you want with your life, it's not per se sinful to live a single life and hope that you can restore your marriage. They're basically saying, I don't think that it's necessary, and I'm not going to labor with you, right, to this end. That's what I wanted. He was not going to be able to do that for me. Doesn't mean he's rejecting me personally. You have to be careful. You're kind of putting your sacred stuff out there as well, right? There's a lot of sacred stuff that's coming, being put on the table. And we don't want to trample on that, for other people. But we could also be disappointed. So let's see. So that happened. I think the other big thing that I just want to say is that there is going to be an element where people have already kind of organized their life in a way where they can manage these important relationships that they have of people who are divorced and remarried, right? And that was true of my friend, without going into specifics, and that's going to be true for almost anybody we run into. It's either going to apply to their brother and sister, their mom and dad, maybe someone at their ministry, or like I talked about before, it's going to relate to their entire sort of community. If they are part of a denomination, this is very important to them. And if we kind of like come too hard at these things, we're going to put them into like a very defensive position because, you're sort of like jeopardizing a lot of their important friendships. You're potentially suggesting that if you get into some of the consequences of adultery or homosexuality or sex before marriage or sex outside of marriage, I should say, or any type of sexual, rape, incest, practice of magic arts, murder, stealing, drunkenness, all kinds of things that are like contrary to the Spirit. There are warnings in the New Testament that these people will not enter eternal life, right? And that the taking baptism or whatever, or taking a job at a Christian ministry does not supersede those warnings for these people. They are still required to walk in godliness and live a blameless life before the Lord. If you bring that stuff in as well, it's going to be too much for them. That's what I would say. It's too much. Even for me, some days it's too much, and even for you guys. I woke up the other day. I went to go do, my quiet time, grab my coffee. I was going to read. I just said, Lord, this is so exhausting. Christianity, the stakes are so high. And man, I don't want to just fight against hell, at 6:30 in the morning. I just want to watch like the highlights of the Cowboys play whoever they were playing and just not have to have like the weight of the world and the weight of glory and the weight of C.S. Lewis talked in the weight of glory. Like, how do you live around other people who are destined either to be like become something so beautiful and regenerated and holy and made like God that if you saw them in that state, you would be tempted very much to fall on your knees prostrate and worship them because of how magnificent they will become when they are renewed in the Lord in eternity. Or they could become something so horrid and despicable and disgusting and demonic and evil and wretched and shameful that you would want to just turn your eyes from them, that it would be such an awful thing. And that this is the reality of living in this in-between time where people are trending in one direction or another. And, to live with that weight of glory is very heavy. It takes humility to say, God, this is like too much for me. I can't bear to think the people that I love not being with you in eternity. And to really consider that many people will end up in a place that was designed for demons. That is the uncomfortable truth that is given to us in the New Testament. And dude, it's not easy to carry that. Our friends, the people that we care about, the people that we wish would help us restore our families, that would speak out, that would hopefully correct our spouse or correct somebody else's spouse to help protect families from the day of evil, from the evil one, from hard-heartedness, from bitterness, that someone would come to them and graciously and full of grace and truth admonish them and say, this is not the way of the Lord, and unforgiveness is not of God. And how can I help you, my brother, my sister, turn around from the bitterness in your soul and start forgiving your spouse? That's kind of what you want them to do. If we're honest, you want to call them to become a person that is part of a larger community that does that for hopefully your spouse and other spouses, and that we could see this huge revival. People would be protected. Kids would be protected. This is a lot to ask of them, right? So I'll just close by saying, what should we have as just general, or what do I have as far as general expectations for these conversations? And what I would say is very little, as far as thinking that I'm going to have a one-off conversation with somebody. And that we're really going to move the needle significantly for them. No, it doesn't work that way. It didn't work that way for me. It doesn't seem to work that way for most people. It's a multi-year thing that happens to them. And the major things is to be ready, to be skillful, and then not to have to defend it. You could just say, this is what the scripture says. 1 Corinthians 7:15 is talking about whether or not a Christian who is married to someone who has fallen away from Christ or no longer is following Christ should do any and everything to keep the marriage alive, even if it means attending a new false religion or whatever. Should they put the marriage at the highest priority? And the answer is no, you shouldn't. You should follow God and realize that this unbelieving spouse has already left them, right? They've already departed. And there's not really a lot that they can do about that anyways. And it's okay that they don't have to bend the knee to their partner's wicked lifestyle in order to try to win favor back with them, for the kids or for whatever. You don't do that. You don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. That's the central question. It's talking about, who are you a slave to? If you can say that, and if you can say the verb used here is doulou, means slavery. It's used 135 times in the New Testament. It's not talking about marriage. It's talking about slavery. The New Testament writers use a completely different word if they want to talk about marriage, and it's deo. If you can remember that, that's helpful. D-E-O. It's found in other places, but it's definitely not found in 1 Corinthians 7:15. Okay? Meaning that at the end of the day, marriage is for life. Even if they married an unbeliever or someone who once was a believer and fell away or is a fake believer or whatever, doesn't really matter. That marriage to unbelievers is in fact recognized by God. So it's to be honored. Yeah. And then just leave it there. And just say, that's the research I did. I also learned that this verse is stated in the perfect tense. And if you were to translate it, perfect tense basically means it's a past action that was completed, but it also has an ongoing present tense implications, you could say. And so the second reason we know that he's not talking about marriage's ending in 1 Corinthians 7:15 is because, to translate it literally, it would translate as the believer was never married and is not now married. To which we could all say, that's not true. Unless you want to completely change, they might take you in this direction. They might say, so that must mean that these people were never married and they are not married now because God doesn't recognize the marriages of believers to non-believers. They might take you in that direction. And honestly, if someone took me in that direction, I would just have to say to them, that's very interesting interpretation. It's one way to look at it. I don't have anything to say about that, so I'm not going to try to argue or say that I've studied on that, because you may not have anything. Just be honest with them and just say, or it could just literally mean that marriage is for life, and that it's talking about that they were actually married in the past, and they are married now. That's just how it works. Maybe I don't like it. Maybe you don't like it. Maybe we didn't know that that's what we were getting into when we stood before God. Maybe we only had some slight comprehension of the disaster that may come in the years ahead. But also, you know what? This occurred to me the other day. Isn't there a pattern in the New Testament where people align themselves with God's ways? I mean, I'm thinking about the life of Jesus. He was called, he received the Holy Spirit at the Jordan, right? John the Baptist recognizes him as the Messiah. He starts acting like a teacher, a rabbi. People are calling him rabbi. He was already a rabbi, but people are believing that he was the Messiah, right? Was it Nathaniel? Philip? I can't remember which one. The people are starting to recognize him as the Messiah, the promised Savior that was to come, right? And he starts teaching and performing many miracles. Right off, you start to see that. Wonders, signs, the disciples are now really believing, right? They're really convinced. And then what happens? You run into problems. You run into pushback, whether it's satanic or whether it's established religious modes that you are confronting or calling out as sinful or whatever, right? And you end up paying the price. We end up paying the price. We end up going through a large amount of suffering. And that suffering, it demonstrates things to people about the worthiness of the cause and the reality of your belief. And at some point later on, there's like a glory that comes to people who stay the course. And that we shouldn't be surprised that this is hard. You know, we shouldn't be surprised. I always like to think of Watchman Nee, obviously a Christian, a leader, a serious, devoted person who seemed to be doing the right things in his life. He was married. He went to prison. He stayed in prison. And God saw it fit for, even though they prayed many times to be released, that he wanted to obviously be reunited with his wife, right? Besides just like, a short little visit that she could make to the prison. But to be released, to go back into ministry, as we would call it, right? You would think God would want this. The orders were given that he would be released, and then the orders were reversed. And that man never made it out of prison. Not many of us want to suffer like that, I definitely do not want to suffer like that. I don't want to even suffer what I am suffering. My friends that are suffering, I don't want them to suffer any more than they already are. I would like to solve all their problems for them. I would like the happily ever after for them. Marital bliss and all that. That's what I pray for. Half the time, and the other half of the time I pray for them to have endurance and strength to keep going. And that they would know the goodness of God, and that they wouldn't become bitter or hard-hearted or fall into sin or depression or anger. Obviously, Watchman Nee somehow produced some really great things during his time of imprisonment. I haven't read a lot from him, but it's just, Christ didn't have this great time either. And that's isn't that like the archetypal way things seem to go? Is people start following Christ, they grow, they run into persecution, and then they either fall away or they don't. And if they don't, it could end up being very bad. And then somehow in there's like this 30, 60, 90 fold, 100 fold thing. And there's some sort of storing up treasures in heaven and some sort of future glory. And I think part of that is just the present glory of getting to know God. All right. If you want to know more about that, that's why we're studying Jeremiah. We're looking at how the Lord reacted to being a victim of adultery and public shame, and trying to figure out how a perfect being responds to sin in the world. Anyway, thanks so much. I just continue to pray for revivals. I hope that's encouraging. I hope that helps you know that you are not alone in different difficulties that come with this. Father, thank you for true faith. God, I pray that you would rise up more worshipers who worship in spirit and truth. God, for the people who are weak, I pray strength for them. For the people who are stuck in confusion, I pray that you would bless their time and give them insight and bring the right teachers to them. God, when we get to the limit of our Greek and language ability and what appears to be an endless number of arguments, like even what I brought up here, that people can bring to us, I pray that in those moments, discernment would come for people, where they would have a sense in their souls, and I would have a sense in my soul, that this is the right path, keep walking in it. Even if you can't explain all the Greek, everything, and all the grammar, everything, that there would be other ways to approach it, where we would have basically an ability to look at your character. Jeremiah 3 comes to mind. But some of the more central, broad brush type of things you talk about forgiving one another, praying for your enemy, being merciful, being gracious, some of the parables. God, I think there's a lot of different ways which people can get to the right understanding of how to deal with these things. I just pray for your help, God. God, I pray for people that are angry. God, that we would somehow find you as we mourn the things that we lost and may never get back. God, I pray that you would somehow cover the shame. You say that you cover the shame of people like you did with the leaves in the garden. Somehow, Christ, your righteousness, the place of honor that you bring us into, is so much far greater and more wonderful than any like nakedness or shame or things that you can really wash us and we'll be whiter than snow, and you can cleanse us. God, we thank you that we don't have to beg you over and over and over again for forgiveness for the things that we've done wrong. God, for the areas of sin that are sticky and persistent, I pray fasting would be effective, and that people could, all of us, we could really be changed people. I mean, changed people that could really love others. You know, we're not going to be here forever. I think the older we get, we realize our time here is short. We want to make progress, hopefully quickly, and not be stuck in these sin habits for decades. We really want to have victory. So God, help us get ultra serious about becoming acquainted with your spirit and putting to death the deeds of the body. God, we forgive the people that hurt us. We forgive our spouse. I pray that we could say their name out loud in our own time. At home, people could say, you know, I forgive Deborah. I forgive, you know, whoever these people are, Nathan or Daniel or whoever the people are that hurt you, that each of us, we could say, God, we recognize them to be sinners like us. God, people are basically products of what they think. As a man thinks, so he is, so he becomes, so he acts, so he talks, so he teaches, so he instructs, so he leads others. God, there's a huge part of what people even think, which is largely based on what they've been told and what groupthink has offered them as the ways of God. It's not easy, Lord. We know it's not easy for people to change their entire mental structure or to change friend groups. And God, I also just want to pray in that vein for people who know that they're in sinful marriages, sinful adulterous marriages, and that they got into those because they were unwilling to forgive their spouse. God, give them the strength to tell the truth, to be courageous, and just say, I did the wrong thing. And to repent and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. And I'm going to humbly admit to everybody in the community, you know, that was the wrong thing to do. And the God, that you would be gracious to the children who may have been born into or because of illicit marriages, and that ultimately they would understand like that was wrong. Their parents shouldn't have done that. But basically that you would take care of them. Yeah. I mean, that's what that's what we were talking about, Father. I mean, that's what ultimately this becomes at some point for some people. So we just, if this is your will, if this is what you really want, we pray you to help people to do it. Give them the conviction to do it. And I don't know. I probably said too much. But God, we love you. Father, we welcome you again today. Amen. Thanks, you guys. Long one. Hopefully a good one. We'll see you soon.